Hello and welcome to everybody who's joined us for this agenda launch today for our issue, which is titled Gendered Implications of New Technologies and Post-Human Subjectivities, Perspectives from the Global South. My name is Clare Craighead. I'm one of the co-guest editors, and I'm here with my colleague and good friend, Dr. Princess Sibanda. And we are just going to have a bit of a conversation about our issue, by way of introducing it, and a little bit about our process and kind of why we were interested in proposing this, this very broad area of post-human subjectivities as a kind of starting point for our discussions in our call for papers. I guess, Princess, is there anything that you want to add to that, or should we maybe just give a brief appraisal of what it is that we're looking at and then move forward? Or is there anything that you want to add?
No, really, except to say welcome to everybody and thanking them for making it. But yeah, let's get into it. Thank you.
Great. I mean, really, in developing this call for papers for this particular issue, it was really our intention to not only curate a space, but in many ways also hold a space for reimagination, redevelopment, resituating, redefining of existing discourses around a very central question. I know for me, this idea of what it is to be human, what is it that makes us human, and particularly on my side, as we also have moved into a kind of COVID world and our interactions with technologies become more pronounced, really the interface of the human with technology, obviously understanding that the technological elements are only one aspect of post-human subjectivities, but really that is a starting point for me. And in developing the call for papers, it came out of my own PhD research, which I started last year, which really is taking a look at ideas around live performance as they become mediated, and it's something that I've experienced particularly significantly, I think, over the last 2 years with the impact of COVID, coming from a live performance background into these mediated spaces and what that means, and a very real interest also in embodiment. One of the areas that I started to read quite furiously around was this area of cyborg theatre, which is what also sparked my ideas in terms of, sending in this proposal for this call for papers. And the idea again of the kind of human interaction as it's mediated, and also then, what that means. And then, what comes into that in terms of our situation in the global South, and a lot of our discourses around humanity, what it means again, what is humanity, what it means to be human, who is identified as human, and how decolonial discourses start also to infuse in these spaces. Admittedly, so, a lot of the reading that I've done in relation to post-human discourse or post-human subjectivities or post-human humanities, or however we want to label them, has not necessarily been generated from the global South. So another part that I'm interested in looking at is how we navigate that space. How do we insert our voices into that space, and how does decoloniality, for instance, intersect in terms of a post-human foundation or understanding, or again, but really the intention to open rather than to close. But again, obviously, there has to be a focus in terms of engaging a call for papers, and so that focus really did take, in many ways, a lot more of a technological engagement. And perhaps this is a starting point for further engagements and further development of discourses from our location in the global south in relation to the very, very vast spectrum that is posthuman. I don't know, Princess, if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, just to also reflect on the process and say that what brings me to posthuman theory is confusion is a good place to start. Wanting to understand what it means to engage with the posthuman theory, or what posthumanism is. When Clare invited me to embark on this journey with her, I was wondering, what is posthumanism? Because that was my first encounter with the theory, apparently. But also, she had also invited me to kind of come and, in quotes, simplify. Because we always engage in an interesting way, because Clare loves theories. And I always say you love dense theories. And I always come in to say, how do we simplify this? How do we make it more accessible to people like myself who often run away from density? But also it's quite an interesting intersection to kind of engage with theory at the level where it's also dense and simplified. What is the connection there is also mirrored in this particular edition. We have the likes of Betty Govinden really grappling with it and also mediating or meditating on what posthumanism is in reference to our own experiences. We also have other people bringing the popular cultural products like Nasisto, Kombali, Mazibugo, our social media scripts, everyday social media scripts, and how they intersect with the posthuman. And as I have said, I think I mentioned the word intersex. I'm quite interested in queer narratives and the like. But yeah, so I find myself coming into the whole posthuman conversation and new technologies in terms of how they further feminist conversations in the South, how they challenge what it is to be human, who frames what a human is. So those are the questions that I was also grappling with in coming into this work with Clare. So yeah, I think I'll just mention that I come from confusion, and it's been an interesting process, as it were.
Thank you, Princess. I mean, I think that confusion is also part of what it is. I mean, we, to speak about posthumanism or is also to ask, well, what is human? And that in the world that we live in is a space of confusion. It's a space of power. It's a space of ideology and politics, as much as it is also a space of confusion. And I think it's also, I mean, I've said this to you, before, sometimes that confusion is disenfranchised in academic spaces. And I think part of what we were discussing in our own engagements was to embrace the confusion and to say, well, it's not necessarily negative, and it's not necessarily unacademic, in a way, and that it's also okay to be grappling, because that's also generative. That's how, and at least that's how we've come to it, this idea of, how are things generated, who generates them, and how do we then receive them, and what do we do with that? And again, I think the intention really is more open than closed, to invite opposing sides of the same coin to engage those quite vast spectrum, and as you rightfully point out, the intersections that can occur. And I think that at least this volume does house quite interesting intersections, quite interesting disruptions, quite interesting differences, that I think can only enable us to grow, to move forward, or through, or sideways, or whatever that movement is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think with that, I don't want to be hogging the space. We've got a fairly full program ahead. So I think with that, Princess, is there anything else that you would like to include before we hand over to Lee Stone, the chair of the Agenda Board?
No, I think we should proceed with that. I mean, the volume speaks for itself. The authors, some of them are here, so
we'll be hearing from them later. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Princess. Lee, we will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of one of Agenda's latest journals, themed Gendered Implications of New Technologies and Post-Human Subjectivities, Perspectives from the Global South, edited by Clare Craighead and Princess Sibanda. Today's journal launch promises to provoke meaningful discussions and provide insight into the need for a post-human ontology and a new ethics, which foreground the socio-political aspects of the post-human predicament, including the specific forms of dehumanization and discrimination that define our era. Against this backdrop, for those that may not be aware, in the 1970s, a group of inspired and inspiring young women came together to play their role in the struggle towards freedom. These young feminists set out to bring the fight against women's oppression into the political equation, and they succeeded by founding Agenda, South Africa's first feminist journal in 1979. Agenda ensured that feminist issues were taken to women's groups where issues affecting women could be brought to light, and organized workshops initiating debate and voicing the demand that the rights of women be fully incorporated into the agenda for a democratic South Africa. Over the past 43 years, Agenda has made a remarkable contribution by giving women a forum, a voice, and skills to articulate their needs and interests, to transform unequal gender relations. Consequently, fundamental society. This struggle continues in a number of critical and fundamental ways, as is evident in the journal being launched today. Thank you for your interest in Agenda, and especially for your continued support of the work that Agenda does. I now hand over back to Claire and Princess to lead us through this launch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee, for that. So without any further ado, we have one of our contributors, Hannah Ma, who co-contributed a discursive piece with another writer, Dr. Leanne Lutz. And Hannah has a video essay that she developed last year as part of another dialogue platform that we've invited for her to share with us today, because at the heart of this video essay, I think, is potentially the beginnings of a kind of not just an artistic manifesto, but also an artistic post-human manifesto. So I'm going to hand over to Hannah, who will introduce her video essay. And the video essay is about 13 minutes long, 1-3. And I do hope that everybody enjoys it. Thank you, Hannah.
Hello, thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hannah, and I'm so honored to be invited. And I'm very grateful to the whole Agenda team and the editors. Yeah, actually, everything was said that also relates very much to this video essay, because it was a result of a big confusion of my personal life, my artistic life, and then also the pandemic hitting. And the dialogue format of Jomba was like the first try of myself to find words that align to my choreographic research. And when I started working on it, I found out that actually this is kind of impossible. It's always just a try. And I felt like whenever I want to fix something, it dissolves. And so this is I feel like the video essay is kind of a meditation of the try of digitalization of a choreographic work, and then the partnering with words. So I think it will create different meanings or feelings within everybody. And it was my own try to leave myself behind, and the try of being not a fixed point, but somehow being nowhere and everywhere, and overcoming all kind of labeling, especially gender labeling. And so I'm inviting you to dive into it with us and enjoy. Thank you very much.
Why intimacy is the sphere where embodiment and integration becomes evident in the evolution of humankind in a globalized capitalist world. The body is the 0 point of the world, the place where paths and spaces cross. The body itself is nowhere. It is the tiny utopian core at the center of the world. In reality, my body is always somewhere else, being linked to all somewhere else's in the world. In reality, my body is always somewhere else. It is somewhere else in the world. In reality, my body is always somewhere else. My body is the 0 point of the world, the place where paths and spaces cross. I agree with Foucault's statement. If you continue this line of thought and see the body that way, intimacy is the space where I can share that nowhereness with someone else. If in reality my body is always somewhere else, and your body is always somewhere else, and our bodies become the 0 point of the world, the place where paths and spaces cross, we can be a point zero in space and time together. To me, intimacy is the allowance of my body to just be in the here and now, in the nowhereness, in the now-here-ness. Intimacy means to me to allow the being to just be nothing more, with no intention and not in a productive state of being. That's what I discover in dance making. If I can allow my dancers to free themselves from all categories and just be in their body, be in space and time and be together, then something magic happens. Then they listen to themselves and to the other. Then we can experience the sense of being, the essence of being. Practical intimacy means to listen to myself with all my senses and putting the analytical mind to rest, putting the ego to rest. The ego dissolves in the water of our bodies, the water within our cells. The ego dissolves in the ancient knowledge of our bodies, and therefore it no longer tries to find perfection in itself, but in the all-connectedness of water within all people. In water, it is no longer the categories that are of interest. If I'm intimate with myself, and if I really share myself in the here and now, if I open up myself to others, to other human beings, to nature, to everything that surrounds me, then intimacy arises. If I'm able to let go of judgment and categories, if I can meet the other with an untamed mind, with a fresh look, and with the knowledge of colonial structures and the intent to let them vanish, then I'm allowing intimacy to myself and to others. It's that allowance and that choice of intimacy that makes us human. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas formulated the not easy thought: the transcendence of the others, which constitutes his, her glory, includes in its concrete meaning his misery, his homelessness, and the right that belongs to him as a stranger. Levinas thinks of ethics and the individual in terms of his unavailability. A thinking that is already expressed in Martin Buber's philosophy, that the I only becomes the I through the you. Levinas reinforces this thought that one's own thinking, speaking, and existence is only possible through the other, and that he does not recognize the other as strong and powerful, but as weak, displaced and alien by nature. So coming back to Foucault, the choice to allow intimacy can create to become an utopian core at the center of the world, a place of silence. Through choosing to define my me through the you, our egos dissolve in the water of our bodies. Our egos dissolve in the ancient collective knowledge of our bodies, and therefore it no longer tries to find perfection in itself. The reality humankind has created by so far has lost that interconnectedness, since there's no space for intimacy in its rational and globalized capitalist world. That's why we need a new concept of intimacy related to the body state of rest and unproductivity. Intimacy is something we can only share when we return to a state of rest and remember what is essential to life and place value on our inner self. The non-reproducible, magical soul, the aura, the prehistoric part in every individual. Obviously, this is not a productive state of being when you look at it through the lens of globalization and a capitalist society, since it means that we free ourselves from a system of productivity and exploitation. That is why intimacy becomes something so fragile. When we are true to ourselves, no dollars are produced. That means whenever there's an intimate moment that might not serve the globalized production system, it vanishes into thin air. Which is exactly why the construct of intimacy is so important, and why we have to be very careful and to look out for when politics are intervening and controlling the zones and spaces where intimacy is possible. My own policy of intimacy that I discovered through my choreographic work, which is based on swarm intelligence and a search for a collective consciousness, is nothing that I can analyze with my mind and with my rational brain. Intimacy is a feeling down in my guts. It's my cell's intelligence. It's cell memory and a connection with a dancer's body made by many bodies. In the end, intimacy is, if we look at it from a biological standpoint, the memory of being safe, comforted, and nourished in the womb. Throughout our lives, we try to get back to the state of infinite love and security. Intimacy is a space, a feeling, a sensation, a longing. Something we are all trying to find throughout our life, but we are often struggling with. We don't know how to define our intimacy, and neither do we know where our intimate spaces take place. This is what we have to redefine for ourselves. In my work as a hospice helper, I accompany people who pass. I see a very strong connection between people leaving this world and newborn babies. It is what they are, how they are, their state of being. They are, but without any consciousness of being. They overtake the here and now without even knowing that there is a construct of a here and now. The whole experience is very direct and strong. It is existential. You can feel the body's intelligence and mind. You can feel cells, flesh, skin, bones. Everything is alive. Everything is intelligent. This is the space where I see and I experience and I feel intimacy. Whenever a child is born or a person passes, we pass the state of being here and being vulnerable, being dependent on the other, the you, being transparent in a way to the other side and being void of identity. Intimacy is that way we go when we are allowing ourselves to be here and now and not being judged, not being put in a certain category, and allow ourselves to be dependent on someone else. I think intimacy is very much related to what I call a metaphysical or spiritual state, where we allow ourselves to be just as beings without defining ourselves as human, without identity. I think this is the most comforting and also, in our capitalist and rational times, the most important state to define and redefine for us as a society. Giving space to intimacy, to allow vulnerability, to allow people to show what they really are, when we allow ourselves to just be with everything that is, and if we are together with nature, we allow ourselves to flow with the pulse of the universe. We allow ourselves to feel and become the earth's rhythm. So, to me, intimacy is a spiritual state of being. Intimacy is the space where we can find our true selves, in silence, in rest, in the unknown. And how to deal with that? Political and rational decision-making is having a big impact on us. Intimacy means to take a counterposition to the place where our society is at the moment. We have to empower us through intimacy. Or the hurt intimacy, abusive situations, domestic violence, exploitation of nature and people, and isolation through processes of globalization, but also through situations like the COVID-19 pandemic, are situations we have created ourselves. Therefore, only we can empower ourselves to change. We are allowed to be in vulnerable situations that make us feel ashamed, small, or unworthy. Feeling that is also part of being intimate with myself. It is normal in a way of allowing the body to be what it is. We have to remember our own dignity and the power of transformation, and therefore we have to change our constructs of togetherness. Humankind is able to become a swarm again and to reconnect with swarm intelligence, to discover a collective consciousness. This is what I've done in my choreographic work. If we become a swarm again, we can overcome isolation and egoism through developing this collective consciousness. I believe that man, womankind can heal and overcome colonial structures through reconnecting in an intimate way. I believe that we can heal and surrender by allowing ourselves to be and reconnect with the other in an intimate way. Because I only exist because you exist, and we only exist if we reconnect, and if we connect, and if we find the intimacy between ourselves.
Thank you so much, Hanuma, for sharing yourself with us, reflecting on your personal journey and also how it intersects with the theory that we're engaging with in this particular edition, the posthuman, and also how you further or complexify the experiences of being you. And I think a lot of people have questions and contributions or comments around that, but we're going to reserve that for the question and answer segment. At this particular point in time, I'm going to invite Dr. Bibi Berger to present.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me. As Claire and Princess mentioned in the beginning, I also see my article as intervening or as in participating in this discourse where we're trying to rethink the human, but the human is still often, the voices doing this, the rethinking is still often the Western white male voice. So I want to, or I argue in my paper that it's necessary to think differently about what the relationships between the human and the non-human world are and should be, but it is equally necessary to avoid lumping all humans together and to ignore the violence that humans wreak on each other. So in my paper, I argue that Graham Harman's object-oriented ontology is one branch of posthumanism that does not take sufficient notice of these issues. But for the sake of this short introduction, I will not go into the nuances of Harman's argument. Rather, I will talk about how Ghanaian author Ama Ata Aidu's short story Nowhere Cool can be read as a text that takes seriously both the critiques of anthropocentrism and the social situatedness of humans. So on first reading the story, I was immediately interested in how it foregrounds the relationship between the human and the non-human. So this is instead of foregrounding things like plot or character, which are usually the focus of short stories. Nowhere Cool consists of two parts. The largest part takes place on an airplane where a woman named Sissy is flying from New York to the west coast of the United States of America. She is Ghanaian and she's in the US for a fellowship. While she's on the plane, she starts thinking about the plastic label she notices on the baby next to her. She starts about the label as object, about plastic as material, and its link to oil. This leads her to thoughts on the extractive economy based on oil and cotton, and her thoughts turn to slavery and how slavery turns humans into inhuman cargo. So this is the largest part of the story, but the story starts with a few paragraphs in which a schoolgirl is sitting in an English literature classroom, and she's feeling like, and I'm quoting, she could never understand or cope with aspects of the class. While the classroom, presumably situated in Ghana, is warm enough to heat great-grandmother's bathwater, the students read about carriages getting stuck in snow. This makes the schoolgirl feel sleepy, and I'm quoting, so I would just sit like a stone, my eyes wide open, but staring at nothing, while my thoughts wandered around familiar things that were being chased away by the demands of the culture of our conquerors. So I argue that this is a story about how humans see and interact with non-human objects. The main body of the story is the plastic tag that sets Sissy's thoughts running in a certain direction. In the part set in the classroom, the literature that the girl reads, as well as the objects in the literature, the carriages getting stuck in snow, are these objects. In both sections, the characters' relationships with objects are influenced by other aspects of their identity and embodiment. The characters are not neutral humans in the way that Harman conceives the human as being neutral, and the relationships with the objects are not the same as everyone else's would be. These relationships are influenced by their specific identities as Ghanaian women and Ghanaian women with a specific politically informed worldview. Aidu wrote the story long before today's debate about posthumanism, yet it illustrates the possibility of centralizing the non-human rather than the human, but still recognizing the differences between humans and the existence of a history in which some humans are dehumanized. Okay, thank you so much. And this was not really long enough to give a full view of my article, but I hope the little taste was sufficient.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berger, for that. Certainly, I'm sure there will be some discussion in our Q&A section after. It is now upon me to introduce one of our other contributors, Betty Govenden, a longtime friend of Agenda. And Betty, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you
Loud
hear me?
and clear. Yes, we can.
Lovely.
Yes, we can.
I'm delighted to join for this launch. And I'd just like to say how happy I am with the work that Agenda continues to do and its activist role it's just absolutely amazing how it has sustained its mission over the years. And the recent issues speak for themselves. So a special thank you to the advisory board and all those who work with the gender. And I'd also want to say a special thank you to Lo Hasten, and to Shireen Raghunan, who are always there ready to assist me. And I must say, I was very, very challenged when I saw this call for papers around the theme of posthumanism, because my own ideas were floating all over the place. And this exercise really forced me to settle down and in some ways capture and catch some of my thoughts. So you'll see in the paper, when you get to read it, if you haven't already, it's a long, winding kind of personal journey with my own understandings and my own attempt to see how it all connects. And so do read the paper itself, and do feel free to offer your criticisms. But I'll just go through how I worked out my response to posthumanism. And remember, I was at university in the early to mid 60s. So this is part of my own story and my own journey, from studying in Bush College, a tribal university, Salisbury Island, and to developing and learning and unlearning all the kind of positivist thinking we were subjected to. And of course, there was already so much learning on the campus itself, and then developing into the post-colonial, beyond colonialism and apartheid, into post-colonial, decolonial, anti-colonial stance. And alongside that, unraveling for myself what feminism and feminisms meant. And in one of my papers, which I wrote on Salisbury Island, I said for the 5 years that I was there, the word feminism was not used once officially in lectures. And so in this paper, I look at the general critique of anthropocentrism, in which we were schooled, and then the critique of it and the critique of humanisms. And that in itself is a very interesting journey, because it is a critique of Western humanism, but it also begins to be critiqued from the South, from scholars outside the Western canon. And I refer to Frans Fanon here and Edward Said, who was one of my main mentors. And I also go back to the kind of feminist critique I was schooling myself in, and the way in which there was this feminist critique of humanisms, and how this was really, and that's where post-humanist feminism comes to underline this journey beyond the dualisms. I'll just read those lines from my paper. We have tended to take for granted the dualisms that exist in our present anthropocentric ways of thinking and living. These dualisms are constructed between, for example, the human and non-human worlds, culture and nature, humans and machines or technology. We have separated what we deem as animate from what is seen as inanimate. And in fact, feminisms have been always speaking about this, and have always been post-humanist in that sense. It's just that in recent times, the discussion around post-humanism has come to the fore. But certainly when you read someone like Braidotti, you'll see how our own journeys into the work that we do at a climate, in terms of climate change at a planetary level, are very much in the feminist vein that we've always engaged in over the decades. And I then grapple with the question, I come from a literature background, so I'm looking at the way in which this has worked in literature and the kind of boundary crossing that has happened in literature and also between humans and machines. But I've also been struck by the way in which feminists have always been talking about this in different ways. And I speak here about the cyborg discussion that Haraway generated and in which we participated. But finally, just to conclude, I'd like to read the last few lines from my paper. Posthumanism and posthuman feminism is ultimately the journey to empathy. And because I've had to struggle with how does this link with my concerns fighting racism and sexism, and how does this, and so in many ways, it's not going beyond it, but incorporating it. Indeed, drawing from and adapting Fanon, it is a call to radical empathy. As Bredotti has urged, the strength of post-human feminist thought is in developing affirmative ethical and political perspectives. So it's not just, and it's not an academic intellectual exercise, it's very much an activist exercise about how we live in the world with one another and how we live on the planet. Indeed, post-human feminism is a journey to fundamental unity as we learn anew how to live out our common life on the planet. Human and animal, nature and the landscape, the soil and the air, the trees and the seas, humans and machines. Thank you. I love you.
Thank you so much, Betty. We totally appreciate your voice and your work, especially how you've been furthering the feminist agenda in the Global South. And we hope to engage further with your work. Just to note to the audience that is here that you can download freely the articles from this edition. I think there will be an ultimatum to that, but for now you can download freely and share with others. I
just wanted to say that agenda is a very nurturing space. And I really encourage everyone across the different spaces to engage with the writings and also to engage with the debates that agenda has generated. Certainly for me, it's been part of my own development and growth. And so I wanted to thank you and thank the editors of the special issue. Thank you, Princess and Claire.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. So at this point, I will be honored to now introduce Mbali Mazibuko.
That I'm audible. I do have some connection issues. Thank you so much for extending this invite. Much like when I submitted this paper for the first round of review, I feel quite nervous. But my contribution was titled Sfundo, Feminist Imaginaries of Liberation. And my contribution focuses specifically on Black women's forms of dance. And Sfundo, which was the phenomenon of a dance challenge that grew out from a song in the Amapiano dance genre called John Vulligate. But before I continue with this, I do want to say that when I first saw the dance challenge, this was in 2018, for some reason I was moved. And when I saw the call for papers for the special issue, I kept on asking myself, why was I so drawn specifically to the dance challenge? Specifically because it's also something that I had started to see happen in my immediate space, but also not just among young women. I started seeing my aunts doing it. I started seeing quite an interesting group of women for me, like kind of dancing in that way. So I focus specifically on a form of dance that is now contemporarily known as twerking. But in my contribution, I do discuss how dancing with the isolation of the hips and the buttocks is actually quite indigenous to African women's forms of dancing. So I speak about the dance challenge that grows out of the song. And in this dance challenge, which was initially kind of, I don't want to say it was pioneered by, but the first video that came out of this dance challenge was among a group of 5 18 to 19-year-old young Black women in South Africa. And shortly after that, it became kind of a widespread movement with with Black women across Africa kind of replicating the same dance challenge and also capturing themselves in a video form. So I become interested in African women's kinesthetic movements. And the dance interpretation of the song, as I said, was twerking. And it did move across to specifically Zimbabwe, which is quite interesting for me. One of the theorists that I speak to in my contribution is Halliday, and she engages how twerking, as I mentioned, as the contemporary term for the form of dance, is actually a kinesthetic memory. And I engage how this kinesthetic memory is mediated through technologies such as video capturing and circulating as a digital artifact in digital life worlds like social media platforms. In my contribution, I include observations of tweets on Twitter. And I think I hang on to this particular dance challenge and the tweets because I was quite, during the time, I was quite interested in the kinds of conversations that emerged on Twitter in response to the video itself. And in writing this, I kept on asking myself, what is it about the dance now existing in video format and being so entangled with technologies and being entangled with Twitter in particular? And so I reference Mark Poster's Hue Machine, which draws attention to how information technologies are instrumental in shaping subject formations, therefore creating post-human collectivities. The post-human is similar to what I think through, which is Patricia Clough's and Brian Masumi's conceptualization of the new body, which is the body that is not just neurological, but the body that is entangled with technologies and that is biomediated. So through the entanglement of technology, human capacity may be enhanced as it becomes open to more abstracted and immaterial influence. So I think about how affects like pleasure and joy can somehow be kind of captured in a specific form like a video. So it's almost bottled up, passed on in the form of retweets or WhatsApp messages that are containing this video of African women twerking. And now the sharing of this video or that which has been captured and bottled up is an embodiment of pleasure. So when the next person opens up this video, I found it interesting that the next recipient of this video or of this gift, it was unintentional, intuitive dance. In my contribution, thinking specifically about, as I said, what is it that moved me to move the same ways as these girls? And how is it that a specific format allowed for me or encouraged for me to do so? And without saying, I mean, it's very difficult to kind of speak about your contribution without being nitpicking on every part of it, because I do feel like I did quite a bit of theorizing, but I think I'm just going to leave it here for now. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mbali. Indeed, a really interesting presentation and an interesting topic, and just the links that you are drawing in terms of embodiment that come through in your paper, and certainly there will be a little bit of time for Q&A as we move forward. Our last presenter that I'd like to introduce co-wrote a paper, well, it's a co-written paper by Professor Jeffrey Mahlomaholo and Dr. Rosie Mahlomaholo. I believe that Dr. Rosie Mahlomaholo will be presenting. This will be our last paper presentation for this launch. So welcome. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if we have lost Dr. Mahlomaholo. Certainly, these are the times that we live in. Dr. Mahlomaholo, are you in the room?
Hi. Hi.
Welcome.
These are really trying times, and I had to connect with my phone or my husband's phone, because now just before I could connect, I've lost connection. Can I just request 1 minute, because I have a slide which has pictures that I really wanted to share. Just 1 minute.
That's no problem. Certainly, I think you can share your screen, so we will wait for that to happen.
Yeah, I see that now my computer is connecting. I think yeah, I'm here. Recording in progress. Thank you very much, and allow me to share my screen. And my apologies for the glitches from what we tend to live with these days, which is technology. And in South Africa, we are even worse, because we live with the load shedding every day. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, thank you for allowing us this space to talk about our paper. Our paper is titled Creating Sustainable Post-Human Adaptive Learning Environments for Pregnant Teenagers. My name is Rosie Makrasmisi, and my co-author is Sichaba Mahlomaholo. My introduction is simple. It's just showing that in a funnel, we are having the environment, the context, and the relationality that makes up a pregnant teenager. It shows the relationality between all this that makes a teenage pregnant in the context of the study. And I wanted to start with just reminding ourselves what is a teenager? A teenager is a growing child, aging 13 to 19 years. And according to the World Health Organization, they regard this stage as a period that needs special attention. And in terms of the cognitive ability, most neurologists consider the brain still developing when in the early and mid-20s. Physically, these people that I'm talking about, their bodies are still growing and developing. And emotionally, these people that I'm talking about, who are the teenagers, they can still have the mixed and fragile emotions. We know that this is a very stage where we talk about adolescence. And the subject of this study is the pregnant teenagers. And the literature shows that, and the research shows that at this particular stage, these people, if they get pregnant, their health become extra risky, and the pregnancy become very risky to both mother and child. And before I can even continue, I looked at the social media and the literature, and I decided to take this a picture of a teenage pregnant girl whom many people, and this was written by a man, who think that parents should be loved, not be burdened. They look at the issue of teenage pregnancy as they focus at these young girls who are emotionally, physically, and cognitively still growing and immature, as intentionally burdening their parents. Because now this is a teenage pregnancy over the shoulder of a parent in a context of the South. You can see this parent is crying in front of this picture. There's a poverty, and there's a big, huge a tummy of a girl who intentionally decided to get pregnant in order to burden the parent. As you can see from the representation of this picture, there is no a male here. It's just this girl who decided to get pregnant on her own and burden the mother. As you can see the masculinity, and you can see the humanism, and you can see the hierarchy at which many things are just focusing more at this empowering women. And this is the conventional environment. Already these young teenagers, these young girls, their conditions of being pregnant is already marginalizing them. Remember, pregnancy on its own, whether you are a matured woman or otherwise, is more of something that requires sensitivity and attention. What more when your body, your mind, and your cognitive is still trying to develop and grow. And already there is a preconceived notion of blame games. These young girls are bearing stigma, and they are facing exclusion. And then I went on the very public source that were already made in a public domain. And I saw this group of young girls in a very common environment or conditions in South Africa, whereby many of our young girls, like the literature says that recently 60% of them are getting more pregnant. As you can see, they are in this more of a public school. And here people were saying, we cannot blame the parents. We cannot blame these girls are intentionally going all over and to sleep around. No one is talking about males. No one is talking about the relationship that came about to bring this pregnancy. They blame and stigmatize girls. The very same girls is the one who has to carry this burden on her own without any support, without bearing all the stigma and exclusion, while compromising her studies, her learning, everything without the support. Hence, we came up with some ways of thinking beyond only our humanism, thinking beyond that, going beyond human, go to the non-human, and creating this providing space for these girls to be cyborgs while using the AI, artificial intelligence, in a form of adaptive learning, and provide the support that may be needed to them to perform just like anyone else. Because we know hierarchically, Black women, especially the marginalized children at the age of growing of those that age of teenagers, they are at the very lowest level of the hierarchy, and they are most vulnerable and they are voiceless. So we argue that through adaptive learning that will provide space and the freedom and allow them to become cyborgs and provide the necessary support. This learners will have the power or the strength. This is where we any aspect under posthuman human in the context of human and relationality, it gives birth to the environment through which there is a sustainable learning environment. As well as in the context of South Africa, our national development goals. This idea bring about decentralization of the entity by emphasizing on not the entity as human beings, as the environment, as the machine, but the connection between them, the interaction and the processes that bring about or bring harmony between these entities. Adaptive learning as a form of AI or artificial intelligence empowers this girl because they become recognizable as cyborg. And we highly looked and worked with the theory, cyber feminist theory of Diana and Hathaway, where they talk about and they advocate for the technologies that constitute gender equitable social relations. These are the technologies that unsettle male-centered humanist limits and favor women in that particular case. I think we are going somewhere because as we try to go and voice and become the voices of the voiceless, I took from the public domain one a picture from the Department of Social Development that say it is everyone's legal obligation to report teenage pregnancy. And by reporting this, you help government to give all protection services to the pregnant teenagers. This was done during the Child Protection Week in this year, 2022. It means at least whatever it's been done, how all the work and the contribution of agenda, it's out there, it's receiving attention and the attention that it needs. So in conclusion, we are saying pregnant teenagers' predicament does not have much to do with who they are and what they are able to do, but rather it has a lot to do with their rationalities, how they relate, how they connect to the other entities. We are not interested as to which entity is powerful. We are looking at the relationship that supported this teenager to learn and become a better project and become a better future generation that will also take the voice and teach others in the future. their relationalities and positionalities in the world as seen through the lens of post-humanity. I think that is my my last slide and my conclusion. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Most of all, I would like to thank, I think it's Prof. Lay Ho, who have been very supportive towards this. This one was a new terrain for us, and it opened so many opportunities and our thinking towards the better future, while we are trying to preserve what we have so that the future generation can also enjoy and benefit from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rose. And thank you so much for bringing to fore such an important conversation, especially within the Global South context, where we know that pregnant teenagers are met with shame and rancor. And so it's interesting to have an alternative perspective, and also how digital technologies can also come in handy to assist them with their learning processes. So we appreciate your work. And it's a pity that we did not give you enough time, but I know people will engage with your work. Post the Q&A, they will read and engage with your work. So thank you so much for that. At this point in time, I'm now going to invite a friend and a colleague, Sfundo Sosibo, to share a poem with us. Over to you, Sfundo.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sibanda. Thank you to you and to Clare Craighead for the invite. And thank you also to Agenda for the evening. The poem that I'm going to recite this evening is quite a short poem. This poem was a meditation of what happens to queer bodies in the country, given that, of course, this is Pride Month. And as we are somewhat aware of the things, or rather the crimes that are perpetrated against queer bodies, against female queer bodies in the country. And so this poem was a meditation and a dedication to those individuals and to those souls as we grapple with what it means to be human and post-human, particularly for those whose humanity is compromised. The poem is called Ukufa Kwethu. Their tears finally came today, came and fell like the corpses that crashed at Easter and lent no resurrection to the crucified. I knelt before strange queer graves that screamed from beyond and asked for amahubo I could not summon. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today, Sanmona there at the back, we are gathered here to bid farewell to fruit harvested unripe by greed, untamed, unchecked, unseen by the Old Testament that wrote a death sentence in the chapters stolen from the truth. Ruth, youth sacrificed on the altar of blasphemy. Where are the gods that poked into the universe and blanketed it with the rainbow? Where is the commander-in-chief? Blood drowns the streets, chokes newborns as inkosi ibalekela Africa. I used to know my way home, yet this hour finds broken compasses in our breast pockets, shattered by ukuthukwa kwezinyanya. I am, we are broken, in need of songs hidden under my art scale to weigh azanya, zinja. This is a cracked poem in memory of Izitsha Zethu. This is a spell biblifying Ukufa Kwethu. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sfundo, and thank you for also acknowledging that it is Pride Month and enabling us also to have this acknowledgement on our platform tonight. Bravo, as Leanne says in the chat. So it now falls upon me to open the floor for some Q&A. Our time is quite short, so perhaps we could take 1 or 2 questions, and hopefully also that the dialogue continues offline. But if there are any questions, you could either pop them into the chat on the side, those of you who are in the room with us, or raise your hand and ask them directly. I'm not sure if there are any questions. Yes, Seko Kumalo, please go ahead.
Good evening, colleagues, and thank you very much for a very lovely evening and presentation of papers. I have one quick question for the last paper, and then I've got a question that might come across as a critique, maybe, to the editorial team for the decisions around framing the chat of posthumanism. The question that I have for the last presentation was around how we understand the concept of the sexual identity of teenagers, right? At what point does a teenager, a female teenager or a male teenager for that matter, become an agential sexual being? And what mores, what cultural mores and values are at play in curating that, in the ways in which we answer that question? Now, to the editors, I'm curious about something here that runs throughout from the beginning in terms of the introduction of the work right through to the end. One of the things that comes up, and I must preface this question maybe by saying that I'm a decolonial scholar. And so what I hear in the beginning is this concept that as part of the exploration of the posthuman, what informs it and what infuses it as well is the exploration of the decolonial. And I'm curious about the posthuman chat, not only to the editors, and I think you were quite right, colleague, by saying that this issue maybe is an inauguration to further discussion and debate, but I'm curious about posthumanism as a movement. Posthumanism, when we begin to really analyze it, looks very, very similar to what we begin seeing in terms of understanding the self, the relationality of the self with one's environs, with a number of indigenous knowledge systems across the world, not only on the southernmost tip of the African continent, right? And I'm curious about where indigenous knowledge features in the exploration of posthumanism, or whether we continue the work of silencing and sidelining indigenous knowledge frameworks and systems just because posthumanism is a Western concept created and developed within the university space, subsequently perpetuating the idea that knowledge is knowledge only insofar as it comes from the bastion of coloniality that is the university. So I'm curious about our understanding of posthumanism as we use it in the collection, our understanding of decoloniality as it undergirds some of the explorations that inform the contributions in the collection, and more importantly, how that all feeds into our conception and how we relate to indigenous knowledge systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Soseko. Really, really wonderful questions and prompts. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mahloholo to respond in the first instance, and then we can pick up thereafter.
Yeah, we have agreed to decenter the presentation so that both of us can respond. So let me try to respond by reflecting on what Soseko has said about the African epistemology. I know that that part of the question was addressed to the editors of the journal, but
Professor, you have frozen. I wonder if it's only on my side, but certainly I'm not getting any sound or movement in the image.
Yeah, it's frozen on my end too. So.
Okay. I mean, in the interest of time, and I do hate to have to
Can
do
we
this.
just take all the questions and then the people can respond thereafter? Is that like a, yeah, no, I don't have like as much of a theoretical question as Kumalo, but for me, I think that the one thing, as she was speaking, Mbali Mazibuko, I'm just kind of curious on this idea, and this is not necessarily something she said or responding to something she said, but like the idea of, the carnival that happens in the diaspora of the women shaking their buttocks to make a message. And for me, I was just always curious, is there an archive of a similar practice happening in Africa, and trying to root that? I know that the carnival happens in Angola, but I was just wondering, in her work or in the way that she constructs the ideas that she does she look into any of that? But obviously she can respond privately. She doesn't have to respond in front of everyone. But yeah, that's my question.
Thank you, Pure. It does seem that there is one more question. So
Hi, hope you can hear me. I think my comment question speaks to, I guess, in some ways, both of the last two speakers in some way, both around the frame and then two sets of the frame. So the post-human in particular, as it emerges, has a kind of temporal attachment to the human as a category that in some ways tries to denaturalize the human as a natural category, i.e. sort of the distinction between nature and culture, which has its own conditions around the human with a capital H, that is precisely a set of techniques that are foundationally, so to use the example of the body's use. So when the body becomes objectively used for the purpose of labor, that technological advancement or its extension through, say, the washing machine or the domestic worker, for instance, who becomes both human and machine, those aspects of industrialization and capital and slavery, as well as settler colonialism, make the post-human a particular kind of arrival towards new materialism after post-structuralism, which reduces everything to language. And so for me, in terms of its conceptual arrival, it's at the point by which some people come to terms with the connection of the materiality of the body as opposed to its representational form, that emerges in a particular context of experience that intentionally continues to reproduce the human as a white, cisgendered, heteronormative. So I'm wondering then also the Southern, because that temporal recognition also foundationally still assumes an arrival to a particular territory. So those are both spatial and temporal categories. And then newness, again, sort of also then has the same co-implication, and in particular around this question of what is indigenous and what is not indigenous. If there is no natural body, or if all persons aren't, there's no person who is ever individual. We are always relational, and the sovereign self is a particular construction that is not consistently available to anyone in principle, but it's our convention of freedom, because that's what we inherit from, a secular humanist monolingual condition. I.e., there's a particular frame that gets normalized, and then the escape points are already routes of existence that people already connect. And if you're waking up in the morning at 5 to take 3 taxis to get to work, you understand very much how your body is biomediated and technological and use value. But the vernacular of that will not be this conglomeration of the South, the new, and the post-human. And so for, I guess, part of thinking about that, even, to twerk, people have been thinking on TikTok about twerking not only as indigenous or prior, that actually that the use of the body or an embodied release of the body have been historically present in ways that are not linear, i.e. what I'm also questioning is the attachment to linear progressive time as though it always already was. These are very short histories, 400 or 500 years of conditioning of from systems of knowledge that specifically prioritize a kind of white supremacist frame. So when it becomes new, because I know that there is use value in deconstructing nature, culture, and technology. There's nothing natural about anything of what we do about any of us. We are already mediated even prior to the internet, or prior to the telephone, or prior to clothing. So I'm thinking then, how we define, or even the question of metaphysics, which is also at the heart of posthuman theory and the materiality, i.e. when we think about quantum physics versus Newtonian physics, which is also foundational to that shift, the metaphysics of the spirit or the sacred is already consistent with many people's worldviews, and it's not prior to that moment. So I guess I'm thinking, and maybe Betty, when you were speaking, it also comes up a little more. What is it? Because for me, it's not about a going backwards to history. It is a conflation of multiple times, but a privileging of a particular singular progressive time that makes possible the assemblage itself. And then, so what would be the opportunity to undo that set of assumptions?
Thank you so much, Danai. I see that Dr. Matlohlolo is back in the room. So I would like to offer opportunity to respond to the initial question. And then maybe, certainly I don't think we will be able to address in great detail with our time remaining the commentary or the questions that have come up, but potentially we could pick these up offline, but we could make one or two comments relationally and continue the conversation offline. Prof. Jeffrey, I know that you wanted to respond.
Oh, thank you very much. I wanted to finish my response to Siseko to say that in terms of that which is considered to be African epistemology or whatever, it was a question of the I am because we are, the other people are. And our understanding of the posthuman is that it extends beyond the we as only including humans, to include the planet, to include other things, the inanimate objects, animate plants and inanimate objects and plants, and animate animals, humans, and the beyond human. So when we're talking about the we in the post-human that constructs as to we are, we're talking about those relationships that exist, that creates who we are. And I've just been wondering at some stage about my own self, to say when people look at me, they may not see the lovely relationship that existed between my parents that constructed who I am, and ultimately the other people that I've interacted with as I was growing up through the entire lifespan. So when you look at me, you see the climaxing of historical experiences. And if we understand the notion of the post-human from that perspective, that tends to clarify many points. Now, getting to the question that he was posing to us in terms of when does sexuality begin? In response to that, we may have to go back to the old feminist authorities, Alcoff, Judith Butler, and the rest, who are talking about gender as we have been gendered, we have been schooled, we have been educated to assume particular genders. There's nothing essentialist about who we are, but we assume particular identities because of the relationships, the positioning that in discourse that we are assigned from birth to whatever that may be. Let me stop my response there, because I think I'd wanted to read something that, but I can't find that. But anyway, let me stop my response. Okay, so it's here. Let me just see if I can read. It's not a very long piece. It says, "We are all tired. Really, we are. It's a hard road, but it's also a beautiful one. Perhaps we expect too much from ourselves and from others. Perhaps humanity can only make slow progress, like an inchworm. Perhaps we need to celebrate how far we have come and rest more and release the simple pleasures and look for love everywhere There is a river near where I live. It meanders slowly, peacefully. It doesn't ask itself why it isn't an ocean or a raging river or some other thing. It just surrenders to what it is. Maybe we just need to surrender more to who we are. I think I will lie down tomorrow beside the river and take a rest and sweet surrender. Thank you very much.
So I've been speaking in silence. Thank you. I've been responding in a monologue to myself. Thank you very much, Prof, for that. But Princess, you were speaking. Please go ahead.
No, I was going to thank Prof for that response, and I guess I just wanted to say to Siseko that there's an interesting paper by Prof. Divyabana and is it Shreya that speaks about the complex realities of teenagers and porn. I think it would be an interesting piece to read, especially around the questions that you were asking. I think they engage it in such an interesting way, because the moment I saw porn and teenager myself, I was like, what's happening here? But I think upon reading that article, I gain new perspective around that. So I think it would be interesting for you to read on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Princess. And again, as our time is short, just to respond in a general way in terms of, the decisions, around the frame for this particular volume. Obviously, decisions have to be made, and I think ours, as I said at the beginning, were intentionally confused, perhaps, and an embracing of that confusion and that complexity to see, what might come back. These are not necessarily engagements of the posthuman, as I said, at the outset. The discussion often doesn't come from our situations in the global South, and I guess part of it is in me, the curious child that goes, well, what happens if we then address it, if we pick it up? Is it going to, what is going to happen? Is it going to be perfect? Nothing is perfect. But at least I think for me, it is that idea of opening up, being able to reimagine in various ways, being able to rethink, being able to redo even in certain ways. And I think what draws me, at least personally, to these kinds of engagements, and because I come from a live performance background, is the activeness of it, the embodiment of it that can go in many, many directions. And I think it is, as you rightly point out, there is an uneasy tension in terms of particularly engagements around decoloniality and post-human theory, in terms of how they are situated, where they sit. And for me, part of that is to kind of go, well, can we not explore that tension and tether that tension and see what emerges? For me, it's not necessarily a call to answer, but rather a call to explore. And I really, that is the intention. Princess, I'm not sure on your side if there's anything that you want to pick up on and respond to.
I think Prof did that job for me, and I think you explained that very well too. But also to just say, I think the post-human thinking for me manifests in various ways, even within the global South. It's something that we've been doing already in terms of challenging what is framed as the human, and who frames the human. So those kind of questions, I think, even in feminist work in the global South, that has been engaged with a lot. So, and also it is open. Remember, we said it is an open kind of, if I may call it an entity, it's open, it's not closed. So there are many possibilities within the post-human thinking, especially within the global South context. So perhaps even there is not even a tension there. It is, I think it's a system that even coexists, that we've already been engaging with in the global South, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that idea, I think, of the post-conventional research. These things are not new. So how do we reclaim them, I guess, all of those redoings? How do we have the space for our voices in these things that are ongoing, that are being done, that have been being done, that will continue to be done? How do we find our situation within that? And I'm not sure that necessarily is sufficient for the questions that have come out, but unfortunately we are heading towards our closing. But certainly, as I said, very, very willing and happy to pick up any further conversation offline. At this point, we are left with our thank yous. Princess, I know that you wanted to go with some thank yous, and I'll follow you.
All right. Yeah, this just leaves us to thank everybody who's made it here. I know people have busy schedules, and it's almost end of semester, because I know most people who are here working within the university, and it's a lot of work that they engaged with at the moment, but they found time to be here. So I just want to thank everybody. I also would love to thank our reviewers for the volume, for the edition. We also stole some of their time. And I mean, they engaged with the work with care and love. So we do appreciate all of the reviewers who are here present. We also thank family, friends, colleagues who are joining us today. I mean, as emerging scholars ourselves, it's been such a learning curve, but also be vulnerable and bring the work to even some of the people that we've been reading and referencing, and for them to also come and be a part of this launch. We appreciate and thank them deeply, and we hope that we engage further with the work offline.
Thank you, Princess. And just one final thanks to our sister editor from Agenda, Blue Haystrom. Without you, I think Princess and I would still be treading water at the beginning with just the germination of an idea. What an incredible space Agenda is for young scholars, for young women. Just heartfelt thanks for the support and for the real sisterly way in which you just helped us to grow. And I think it's a really heartfelt thanks on that. So with that, it leaves us to close this launch. Thank you to everybody once again, and have a wonderful and safe evening further. Thank you.